As Zeke leaned on his weathered fence post with his hat tipped forward, he felt the same steady peace that his grandfather had felt in this pasture 70 years ago when the land was first deeded into their family name. Every inch of soil paid for with sweat, calloused hands, and a stubborn refusal to be driven off. However, that peace was shattered when he walked toward the North Road, the same dirt track he had used since childhood to lead cattle to water. Zeke froze, the weight of disbelief settling in his chest, because this road was not just a road. It was the artery of his ranch, the path his grandfather had carved with a mule team in 1948, the road written into the deed with perpetual easement that guaranteed his family access forever. But now here stood stranger steel where once there had only been freedom. A truck door slammed behind him, and turning slowly, he saw her, Marla Benton, HOA president of Lakeside Meadows, stepping out in heels that didn't belong on ranch dirt, pearls at her throat, clipboard clutched like a weapon, her voice cutting to the morning air with a mix of triumph and condescension. Mr. Walker, as of right now, we are in charge of this road. Your ranch is in violation of our community bylaws. This access is against the law. Behind her, 2 sheriff's deputies stood with folded arms, Deputy Sachs with a hardened frown, and Deputy Cole Younger, shifting uneasily as if the order didn't sit right. But both badges gleamed all the same. Zeke's jaw tightened, though his voice remained calm, steady as the land itself. This is my family's road. It's on the deed. You're standing on Walker soil. Marla's lips curled into a practiced smirk as she waved her clipboard like scripture. Your deed is outdated, Mr. Walker. As of last month, all internal roads are classified as community property. You'll need to file an appeal with the board if you want access. Her words hit like a whip, cold and dismissive, and when Zeke stepped forward, pointing to thirsty calves bawling just beyond the fence line, she didn't flinch. My cattle need that water, he said. You're putting them in danger. But Marla only theatrically snapped the padlock, her pearls catching the sun as she tilted her chin. Rules are rules. If you want access, you can start by paying your HOA dues. The deputies didn't move. Sachs muttered something about trespass citations if Zeke cut the lock, while Cole avoided his eyes, guilt flickering across his young face. For a long moment, silence hung heavy in the hot air, broken only by the restless stomping of hooves in the pasture, and Zeke realized this was not just a fence. It was a gauntlet thrown, a test of his resolve, and a warning shot from an association that thought it could bully him off the land his family had fought tooth and nail to keep. He adjusted his hat, crossed his arms, and said nothing more, because words were wasted on people who laughed at history. Instead, he burned the image of the padlock into his mind, knowing that locks can be turned, land can be bought, and battles are never won on the first strike. The next days unfolded like a storm building on the horizon, the kind you see coming from miles away but cannot stop, only brace against. And Zeke Walker rose each morning to the sound of his calves cry at the fence line, their throats raw from bawling for water, their instinct driving them toward the old creek at the far end of the road they could no longer reach. And every hour that passed without access meant weight lost, contract endangered, and years of ranching discipline hanging by a thread. Ruth, his aunt and family matriarch, arrived with her box of deeds and brittle maps, her hands shaking not from age but from rage as she laid the yellow 1948 easement on the kitchen table. The ink faded, but the words still sharp. Perpetual ingress and egress across Ranch Road to all heirs and assigns of Walker family, and Zeke studied it like a battle plan, his jaw tightening as Ruth whispered, Your granddaddy fought off bankers and droughts. Zeke, don't let them take this with a smile and a piece of paper. Armed with history, he walked to the gate that same afternoon, unrolling the easement in front of Marla as she returned with 2 more HOA board members, their press suits and sunglasses glaring symbols of suburbia's reach into ranch country, and though Zeke spoke calmly, pointing out signatures, county clerk stamps, and surveyor notations, Marla only laughed, tapping her pearls with her pen as she declared, Expired, Mr. Walker. You can't use ancient documents to defy modern law. This road is common property now, and the board decides access. While Deputy Cole remained further back, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the old paper with what appeared to be respect. His silence made him complicit. Deputy Sachs nodded along with his hand resting near his holster. The next morning, Zeke found not just a locked gate, but fresh HOA trucks parked on the easement, men unloading steel posts, driving them deep into the earth, stringing cameras and signs that read, "Trespassers will be prosecuted." And when Zeke approached, one of the workers sneered, "Orders from a board," before hammering another post in the land his family had tended for generations. That night, as the sky split with lightning in the distance, Zeke sat at his kitchen table with Ruth and flipped through ledgers of calf weights and feed contracts, the margins tightening like a noose, because a feed supplier called to warn him. If the truck couldn't get down the North Road within 48 hours, they'd cancel his entire order, and without feed his herd would starve. Meanwhile, neighbor social media lit up with HOA posts painting Zeke as angry, non-compliant, even dangerous, while glossy images of Marla at the gate were captioned with phrases like, "protecting our community from rogue landowners," lies spreading faster than the truth ever could. At the county office, Zeke found Tomas Rivera, a clerk with sharp eyes and sympathetic ear, who leaned close and whispered, "They're bluffing Zeke. That HOA grabbed the common lot at a tax sale years back, but they never cleared the title. Under that gate, there's a piece of land that technically does not belong to them." Zeke raised a brow, his instincts sharpened by years of reading terrain, not paperwork, and Tomas handed him copies of plats showing messy parcel boundaries, like puzzle pieces jammed together by someone too impatient to check the fit. But knowledge alone wasn't enough. Marla pressed harder, sending Zeke envelopes labeled violation notices, demanding thousands in back dues he never owed, threatening daily fines. And when he ignored them, deputies returned with warnings of criminal trespass if he cut the lock. That night, as the calves cried louder and the supplier set a final deadline, Zeke stood at the fence line under a full moon, measuring the ground with surveyor's tape, marking the exact spot his grandfather once planted wooden posts to guide mule wagons. Ruth's voice soft beside him as she read from her father's old leather-bound notes. "This road is ours, Zeke. Always has been." Zeke vowed that if they wanted a war of paper and property, he would fight it their way, through records, maps, and every loophole and clause they thought he was too simple to understand, because they had mistaken his silence for surrender when in reality it was the patience of a man laying the groundwork for a counterstrike they would never see coming. And in that very moment, with the metallic hum of the padlock in his ears and the shadows of HOA cameras blinking 3 days after the lock clicked shut, when the morning haze still clung to the live oaks and the cattle's lowing rolled across the pasture like a prayer, Zeke walked back into the county recorder's office with a thermos of coffee for Tomas and the quiet steadiness of a man who had made up his mind. The clerk, sleeves rolled to his elbows, slid a stack of plat maps across the counter, his finger landing on a thin, odd-shaped strip shaded a faint gray, parcel 17C, wedged like a splinter between the Lakeside Meadows common lot and the Walker-deeded land. "The HOA acts like they own this, but look at the tax notes," Tomas murmured, eyes bright under tired lids. He turned the page, revealing a string of delinquent stamps and a bank's name typed in small, stubborn letters, Cypress Continental. "This strip was bundled into the HOA's common area years ago during a tax cleanup," he continued, "but the title was never fully quieted. The bank took it back when the developer folded. HOA uses it like it's theirs, but legally, it's a mess. More important." And here he lowered his voice until it was barely a breath. "This strip is the only lawful access to their supposed common lot. Without this, their land turns into a pretty picture you can't reach." Zeke traced a boundary line with a callous thumb, feeling the shape of a plan forming beneath his fingertips like a hidden spring under hardpan. "Who at the bank handles it?" he asked. Tomas glanced over his shoulder, then slid a card from a drawer. "Caleb Price, asset manager. He hates HOA drama," Tomas said. "He'll want it off his books." Zeke called Caleb from the courthouse steps, the sun already biting the back of his neck. The banker answered in a weary voice that carried the sandpaper rasp of years of saying no. "You're the rancher," Caleb said without preamble, as if he'd been waiting for this call since the fence went up. "I've read the Friday reports. The HOA's been industrious." There was a dry humor in his tone, the kind that grows in men who've seen too many self-appointed kings topple. "That sliver," Zeke said, 17C. You still hold it." Papers rustled. A keyboard clacked. "Technically, yes," Caleb replied. Developer defaulted in 12. We cleaned most of it, but 17 CS title got sticky. The HOA has been using it. I hear. They never paid a dime to clear the chain. You want it? Zeke didn't respond right away. Instead, he turned the card over in his hand and observed dust specks drifting in the sun. What's the price? With a sigh, Caleb couched a small number that sounded like a dare. But you'd have to assume the legal work. Quiet title, notifications, possibly a short hearing. I can schedule an internal auction by end of week. If no one bids above minimum, it's yours. A truck rattled by on Main Street, and from somewhere down the block came the murmur of two men arguing about seed prices. Life moving on, unaware that the ground beneath an entire community's arrogance had just shifted. Zeke said, his voice as smooth as creek water on stone. Do it. Send me the packet. I'll have funds ready. That afternoon, he drove to the feed yard for a face-to-face with the supplier, a lean man named Darrell, who had known the Walkers since Zeke's father ran cattle. Darrell warned by tapping the red cancellation date on the clipboard. You got one more day. After that, I can't hold this order with prices where they are. Zeke nodded. He said, give me 24 hours. I'll get you through the North Road by sundown tomorrow. Darrell studied him for a long moment, weighing a lifetime of dealings against the madness of HOA fences and deputy warnings. He finally pulled on his cap. All right, Zeke, 24. Ruth was sitting at the kitchen table when Zeke came in, the 1948 easement spread like a flag, and a pot of beans simmering on the stove. He laid Caleb's packet beside the brittle paper and kissed her temple. We're going to buy the ground under their lock, he said, simply. Her eyes glistened a little, but she didn't bother with surprise. Walker women didn't waste breath on astonishment when grit was required. Then we record it before they can blink, she replied, and reached for the old leather-bound ledger where she kept the family's numbers. Together they penciled out collateral. 8 head from the spring calves, the back 40s hay lease, and a veteran small business line Zeke qualified for but never touched out of pride. Pride don't water cattle, Ruth murmured, signing her name on the loan guarantee with hands as steady as fence posts. The next morning, Zeke filed a notice of easement affirmation at the recorder's office, attaching a certified copy of the 1948 document and a fresh survey sketch Tomas had helped him pull. In crisp, simple language, it stated that any current or future owner of Parcel 17C recognized and consented to the Walkers' perpetual ingress and egress along the ranch road. It was a small page in a big book, but Zeke knew paperwork, like barbed wire, does its work quiet and constant until folks are cut when they try to ignore it. He stepped out into noon heat, the courthouse clock tolling, and dialed Caleb. Filed and stamped, he said. Caleb grunted approval. Auction scheduled tomorrow, 10 a.m., County Annex. Prepare for theater, if the HOA participates. The theater began early. Marla arrived in navy skirt suit, a string of pearls doubled at her throat, and a smile as stiff as a new boot. 2 board members trailed behind her with clipboards, and Deputy Sachs hovered near the door, like a barn cat that had learned which chair dropped crumbs. Deputy Cole came too, a step removed from the cluster, eyes taking in everything without announcing what he saw. A few neighbors drifted in on curiosity, their whispers circling like buzzards. Isn't it the rancher they say refuse dues? Didn't he threaten the board? Marla glided to Zeke with a politeness so sharp it cut. Good morning, mister. Walker, here to observe. Zeke tipped his hat. Here to buy. Her smile didn't flicker. The board's counsel is on standby. We'll see that community resources remain in the community. From the corner, Tomas, attending purely as a citizen, or so he said, lifted his eyebrows at Zeke, and Zeke felt the ground under him steady like when a horse finally decides to trust the rider's hands. In a voice that made even drama sound sleepy, the bank representative called the room to order, read the legal description of 17C, and then announced a minimum bid. Marla raised her paddle at once, numbers spilling from her mouth with the smooth cadence of someone used to getting what she wanted, but twice the bank rep paused and asked, confirmation of authorized funds? Twice her board members fumbled with texts and calls. Faces paling. There are rules even in theater, and one of them is that you cannot spend money you do not possess. When the third hesitation came, the rep cleared his throat. "We'll proceed," he said, eyes sliding to Zeke. Zeke lifted his paddle once. He spoke the minimum bid without flourish, the sound of it landing in the small room like a nail hammered home. "Any other bids?" The rep asked. Even the air conditioner appeared to be holding its breath as the silence spread widely. Marla opened her mouth to say, "Going once, twice." However, the board member to her left shook his head almost imperceptibly, and whatever bluff she constructed gave way in her throat. "Sold." The gavel's crack echoed off the annex's stale paint like summer thunder over dry fields. Caleb's signature was quick. Zeke's was firm. Tomas exhaled with a smile that he quickly swallowed. Deputy Cole's mouth twitched. Almost a smile, but he turned into a thoughtful press of lips the way a man hides a card he isn't ready to play. Deputy Sachs looked like he'd bitten a green persimmon. Marla recovered enough to glide over, voice pitched low. "You've bought yourself a headache, Mr. Walker, without the support of the community. That strip has no value. We control every approach to it." Zeke tucked his copy of the bill of sale into a manila folder and tilted his hat against the window glare. "Maybe," he said, "or maybe I bought the only door to a house you thought you owned." She laughed brittle. "We'll see what the judge thinks." "We will," he agreed. But his eyes had already moved past her, calculating post chains and a livestock swing gate that didn't maim calves. 2 hours later, the deed recorded, Zeke parked at the fence and stepped from his pickup with a new key on a plain brass ring. HOA cameras blinked at him like half-awake eyes. Their lenses watched a narrative that had just slipped beyond their script. He set a cooler on the tailgate, opened it, and took out a biscuit Ruth had wrapped in a dish towel, then ate slowly while he studied the geometry of the gate posts, the bracing wire, the soil compaction beneath the hinge. Patience is a kind of power. It unnerves those who expect explosions. The HOA pickup rolled up in a hurry. Marla at the wheel, 2 board members clutching their clipboards like life vests. "You can't be here," she snapped, but her voice lacked yesterday's gleam. Zeke wiped crumbs from his beard. "Ma'am, I own here." He showed her the deed. The recorder stamp still damp to touch. She scanned it, color draining, then thrust it back with a sputtered, "This will be challenged." "I imagine so," Zeke said, "but while you're challenging, cattle still need water. And this..." He inserted the brass key into the brand-new lock he had installed an hour earlier, replacing her shiny padlock while she was busy protesting downtown. "This opens today." Like a promise kept. The mechanism turned without a hitch. He swung the gate wide and whistled. The calves had learned to distrust that stretch of fence edged forward, then hustled through in a dusty tide toward the creek they knew in their bones. No victory banner flew, but the sound of hooves on hard ground was enough. Marla's face tightened. "You can't open and shut access at your whim. This is a community corridor." Zeke's gaze held hers level. "It's a ranch road under a recorded easement, affirmed by the current and prior owner of this parcel. Now, emergency services will have a code, school buses will have a code, and you'll have access to pass through to your 2 legitimate lots, if you stop interfering with mine. Violate those terms, and you'll pay a daily fee that'll make your board meetings lively." One of the board members spluttered something about extortion, but Zeke didn't bother with the wordplay. He set a laminated notice on the post that spelled it plain: access agreement terms, hours of open passage, phone number for urgent needs, fee schedule for tampering, citation to the 1948 easement, and the new deed record numbers. Deputy Cole pulled up then, dust in his wake, stepping out with a care that announced he had come to witness rather than to command. He read the notice, scanned the deed copy Zeke offered, and nodded once. "Looks clean," he said into his radio. "Owner on site. Lawful access documented." Jaws grinding. Sachs arrived seconds later. He can, Cole cut in, not unkindly, but with the finality of a man who had decided which hill he would and would not die on. "It's recorded." Rumors sprinted through lakeside meadows at afternoon. Some insisted Zeke had stolen community land. Others swore he'd bribed a judge. A few admitted grudgingly that maybe the board had overreached, but the only truth that mattered was inscribed in ink at the courthouse and swinging on new hinges at the fence. When Darrell's feed truck rumbled down the road at dusk, the driver slowed at the open gate, eyes flicking to the fresh sign, then to Zeke standing aside with arms folded. "We clear," the driver called. Zeke replied, "We're clear," and the truck eased through with tires singing a song of relief. From the turnout, two kids on bikes watched with open mouths, while their mother snapped a photo that would later become a quiet internet post titled, "He Didn't Shout. He Filed." That night, under a sky punch full of stars, Zeke and Ruth sat on the tailgate and listened to the nighttime chorus. Crickets, distant coyotes, the steady murmurs of cattle with full bellies. Ruth patted his shoulder once, the way she had when he was a boy who brought home a scraped knee and a hard truth. "Your granddaddy would have liked today," she said. "Not the fight, the finish." Zeke felt the weight, promise, and warning of the brass key as he turned it in his hands. "We're not finished," he replied. "Tomorrow is court, and Marla's pride is still trying to break through barriers." He looked back at the gate, their gate now, and smiled without showing teeth. However, pride cannot prevail where the law forbids it. And this road... He nodded toward the live oaks, the old creek, and the history woven into sweat and soil. "This road knows our name." The courthouse smelled faintly of lemon polish and old paper when Zeke walked in the next morning, hat in his hands, Ruth at his side carrying the brittle easement like it was a family Bible, and behind them trailed murmurs from neighbors, board members, even a few ranchers curious to see whether a black man with a deed and a backbone could stand against the smooth machine of an HOA. Marla sat stiff in the front row, pearls gleaming, lawyer at her elbow, her face arranged into a mass of control. But her eyes betrayed the tightness of a gambler who knows the dice are loaded against her. And when Judge Aline Garner entered, robes whispering across the worn carpet, the room stilled as if the very air understood the gravity of what was about to be decided. Zeke's lawyer, an old friend of Ruth's who had cut his teeth fighting farm foreclosures, spoke first, laying out the 1948 easement, the plat maps, the certified purchase of Parcel 17C, the notice of affirmation recorded and stamped, and with every page slid onto the evidence table. Marla's posture shrank a little further, until finally Judge Garner leaned forward, spectacles low on her nose, and asked in a voice sharp enough to cut glass, "Mrs. Benton, by what authority did your board erect a fence across a recorded easement?" Marla opened her mouth, but her lawyer's hand shot out, pressing her arm, for even he knew there was no clean answer. She stammered about community safety and modern bylaws, but the judge cut her off, voice rising. Bylaws cannot extinguish recorded property rights. That fence was unlawful. That lock was unlawful, and this court will not indulge arrogance disguised as governance. The gavel struck once, a sound that landed like thunder rolling across dry plains, and with it came the order. The HOA to remove all fencing and cameras within 72 hours, to compensate Zeke for feed costs lost during the blockade, and to issue a public correction acknowledging his lawful right-of-way. Marla's face drained of blood. One board member dropped his pen. Deputy Cole, attending in uniform at the back, nodded once in quiet satisfaction. When Zeke stepped out into the sunlight, papers in hand, it was not with a strut or a grin, but with the same steady dignity that carried him through every insult of the past weeks. Reporters asked for comments. Neighbors whispered. Children stared wide-eyed at the man who had stood firm against an association that claimed to own him, and all he said, in a voice even and calm, was, "This road was always ours." Now the record shows it. That afternoon he drove back to the ranch, pastures glowing under the high sun, and stopped at the new gate he had hung himself. Oak posts sunk deep, steel latch oiled smooth, a sign bolted to the crossbar that read Walker Ranch Access, authorized by deed and easement. The calves streamed through as the gate swung wide, dust rising like smoke in a golden light, and Darrell's second feed truck rolled down the road with a honk that sounded like triumph. Marla arrived minutes later, clutching a folded access agreement Zeke had drafted, one that gave the HOA legal passage to their two clean parcels so long as they honored his easement and ceased interference. And though her hands trembled, she signed it beneath the watch of Deputy Cole, who served as witness. Zeke handed her a small envelope containing a single brass key. Her eyes flickered with hope that perhaps he was softening, but when she read the tag attached, "For emergencies only, respect the road," her face tightened not out of triumph, but rather out of the realization that she would never again cross certain boundaries. At sunset, Ruth joined Zeke at the fence line, both leaning on the wood rails as the horizon burned crimson and cattle settled into the evening hum. She pressed her weathered hand against his and said softly, "Your granddaddy would have been proud. Not for the fight, but for the way you never bent." Zeke turned the brass key over once more, its edges catching the dying light, and slid it into his pocket. Not as a weapon, not as a trophy, but as a promise that their family's road would remain theirs as long as the soil itself endured. "They tried to box us in," he murmured, voice low as the cicadas rising from the grass. "So we bought the box and the only key." And with that, as the last of the sun dipped behind the hills in the night, wrapped the ranch in a familiar cloak of stars, the story closed not in bitterness, not in gloating, but in the quiet dignity of land defended, history honored, and a man who understood that true power is not in locks or bylaws, but in standing firm until the world has no choice but to respect the truth you already knew.